It has now been almost 2 weeks since the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded off the southern coast of Louisiana. Exploded about 52 miles from where I'm standing right now. In the 13 days since that explosion, the situation here has gone from tragic and shocking, with the death of 11 oil rig workers, to terrifying, with the sinking of that rig and the subsequent release of tens of thousands of gallons of oil each day. It's since gone to shocking all over again, with revelations that this spill, this unstanched, thundering flow of crude, is more enormous than it originally seemed. How did we get here? How's the response been so far? Well, here's the tick-tock of what's happened. That Deepwater oil drilling rig exploded at about 10 o'clock Central Time on the night of April 20th. What followed was an all-hands-on-deck search and rescue mission led by the U.S. Coast Guard. In the middle of that operation on April 22nd, the devastated oil rig sank into the Gulf of Mexico. It was at that point that President Obama received an Oval Office briefing from the top Coast Guard official, as well as other high-ranking administration officials. The next day, on April 23rd, the Coast Guard called off the search and rescue mission and announced that no oil was leaking from the underwater oil well. That was 10 days ago. The following day, BP officials acknowledged that, in fact, oil was leaking from that well at a rate, they said, of 1,000 barrels per day. In the ensuing days, 1,000 federal, state, local, and private personnel were mobilized in an effort to try to contain the leak. Tens of thousands of feet of inflatable boom were assigned to the area. Robot-controlled submarines were used to try to stop the leak. And administration officials, including Valerie Jarrett and Janet Napolitano, were put into essentially constant communication with BP executives. Then 4 days later, on April 28th, the situation got worse. Coast Guard officials announced that instead of 1,000 barrels of oil leaking per day, it's more like 5,000 barrels per day, 5 times more than had previously been estimated. That was also when they initiated a controlled burn strategy for surface oil. The next day, President Obama gave his first public comments on the disaster, a week after the rig sunk and a day after the scope of the disaster became clear. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano declared the incident a spill of national significance, and that's when the federal response kicked into higher gear. The Department of Interior dispatching teams to the region to inspect other platforms and rigs. Defense Secretary Robert Gates announcing he's mobilizing the Louisiana National Guard to help communities respond to the spill. The Navy sent skimming systems and contractors to the area. The Air Force deployed 2 C-130 aircraft outfitted with aerial spraying systems. On Saturday, President Obama named U.S. Coast Guard Commandant Thad Allen to direct the oil spill response. Yesterday, Mr. Obama personally traveled right here to Louisiana, to where I am now, to get a first-hand look at the situation. 13 days. BP is in charge of this cleanup. The federal government is in charge of overseeing it. The ramp-up of the government's response to this disaster is 0 to 60 in what either feels like a very quick amount of time or an eternity, depending on the clarity of your hindsight. Regardless, this is not over. This is an ongoing, unchecked disaster against which mitigating measures have been taken. But that leak is not fixed. Joining us now is the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson. She is a native of Louisiana. She traveled here over the weekend. Administrator Jackson, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I know you've been in constant communication with those leading the rescue effort tonight. Is there anything that you can add to what we understand about the latest on this response?
Well, I think your timeline is a good one. I just spent 3 days down there, as you said, and met with community members and leaders from the Coast Guard and my own staff, of course, staff from the state and the parish and county governments in Mississippi. And I think that, you know, this ramping up, as you described it, is an accurate way to talk about what's been happening on the ground there.
I know that it is BP's responsibility to pay for this disaster. The president himself has repeatedly reiterated that. But frankly, while they have been in charge of stopping it these past 13 days, it's been going on for 13 days and not getting fixed. Has BP been given too much control over the response? I know you met with their CEO earlier today.
Yeah, you know, I think that one of the things we have to remember is that there are some things that BP has some expertise on, and oil companies have expertise on. In your earlier segment, you talked about the fact that this is cutting-edge technology. I would agree with all of that. There are other things that the government's pretty good at. For instance, the estimates of the spill, the original knowledge that we had too low an estimate coming from BP came from the government. The air monitoring that EPA is doing, the work that we're doing to get mobilized for shoreline response through the Coast Guard, I think there the government can and must take the lead to give some assurances to citizens.
How can any company get government approval to drill in water that is deeper than they know how to clean up? I mean, that sort of seems like the fundamental government issue here, the approval for this type of drilling in the first place. We know that what's happened here in the Gulf has exceeded even what BP said was their worst case scenario for this. Should they have not been given approval to do this in the first place?
You know, Rachel, I think that is but one of many questions that we're all going to look for time to answer with facts. Facts we're getting now, facts we'll continue to get. I think one thing is clear. That is that there was supposed to be a fail-safe here, this blowout prevention valve. It's not safe at all. It hasn't worked. And sadly, there isn't much redundancy in that system. So what we're finding out is that BP now has to turn to innovative techniques to try to stem this ongoing release of oil.
At an event earlier today, Governor Rick Perry of Texas said that this disaster, talking about this disaster, he said, from time to time there are going to be things that occur that are acts of God that cannot be prevented. My sense to that is that this wasn't an act of God, it was an act of BP, in the sense that they were responsible for this not happening, given that they were responsible for the oil coming out of this seabed. What is your reaction to that, this idea that this was somehow unpreventable?
I just don't understand this rush to try to determine what happened and, more importantly, what it means. I absolutely applaud the idea that we all need to be thoughtful about thinking about later what this means. But right now our focus has to be on the people who are affected. Certainly, originally it was on the people who were lost and missing. But we have to stop that oil from coming out of the seabed. It's coming out, and it's making a bad problem even worse. So I don't want to speculate about why the governor said what he did. This is a mechanical failure right now. We may find out some other things caused it, but right now there is a fundamental failure of the fail-safe mechanism.
Talking to people down here today in Venice, the conversations that I had with people kept coming back to the same thing over and over and over again. Nobody has any confidence that we can actually cap that well. Nobody has any confidence that at 5,000 feet under the surface of the sea, that we have the capability, or that BP has the capability, or that any human has the capability to shut down something that is gushing the way that it is. Are you confident that it can be capped?
I'm not confident, but I have to believe that we cannot rest until it is capped. I mean, the people of the Gulf Coast, when I talked to them yesterday, there's a certain fatalism. If you live down there on the Gulf Coast region, if you live in that area, you're below sea level, behind levees, all that's designed to protect you, and we all know that things go wrong. We have recent examples that they go wrong. What I keep saying to people is that we have to rely on the resilience and expertise of people down there. We have to listen as much as we talk in case there are some ideas. One of the things that's clear is that the technology to control this is probably going to come out of the industry that developed the technology to drill that deeply. And that's something that I'm sure we'll have lots of conversations about going forward.
Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lisa Jackson, thank you for your time tonight. The whole country wants this resolved and looking to you as part of the administration for leadership on this. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rachel, for being there with those folks. I'm sure they're glad you're there.
Well, I know the bugs are. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.